right, I got the go ahead. All right. Welcome everybody to Understanding Backgammon Formulas by Art Benjamin. Art is a professor of mathematics at Harvey Mudd College in California. He is known as the Mathemagician, and he has multiple books. He's an author of multiple books on math. You can find his TED Talks online. They're super fun to listen to. He is also on the USBGF Board of Directors. He is an author of magazine articles for the Primetime magazine. He has a wonderful Math Overboard series. A couple of recent articles are Handy Tips for Counting Pips in the fall 2019 edition, and also What's the Take Point in the summer 2020 edition. So you can get those articles if you are a premium member of USBGF. It comes with this wonderful magazine and includes Art's articles. So definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it before. So Art, we're delighted to have you today. I know the players are really excited to learn more about backgammon formulas. So we leave it to you.
All right. Well, I'm excited to do this as well. My game plan was to present to you 20 formulas, right? And each using a number from 1 to 20. And I got so excited. I had all these formulas ready. And as I was talking with Jeremy Begay yesterday, and I was telling him about all of them, he says, "You're not going to make it to 15. I don't even think you're going to make it to 10. So what I've done is by the time I finished my 8th formula, I had 60 slides. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to give you 8 formulas. And then if there's time, I can go into others. And though I don't have the slides prepared, I can certainly talk about them. I'm always happy to go off on tangents. And let's just get started. So rule number 1 involves the 1 point, the ace point. So bearing off the ace point, McGrill's theorem says in a non-contact bear-off position with at least 1 checker on the ace point, it is always correct to use an ace to bear off a checker. Now, this is a theorem in the sense that no one has ever found a contradiction. I don't think there's been a ironclad mathematical proof of the theorem. Bob Coca has convinced me that it probably be very, very difficult. But at least computationally, empirically, this result seems to be true. So, for example, let's say you were in this position and White has a 2-1 to play. You know, you're desperately you've got an awful stack on your 6 point. You'd think, of course, I want to play the 2-1 off the 6 point so I can better distribute these checkers so I don't waste more checkers later. But no, even in an extreme kind of position like this, it is better to take the ace off than to play 6 to 5. In essence, the reason for this is if you roll a 5 later, you're no worse off than you sort of are now. So you sort of take the you may as well use that. You can't use an ace more efficiently than to take a checker off. Okay, so and while we're on the subject of rules you should know for bearing off, if it's possible to bear off 4 checkers when you roll doubles, then you should nearly always do so. There are some counterexamples, but you may honestly never see these counterexamples in a lifetime of real play. So if you can get 4, if you can take off 4 checkers with your doubles, always do so. Even especially with your double ones, take 4 off the ace point, as tempting as it might be to redistribute. More practically, and you will occasionally see this in exceptions to this, but not often. If it's possible to bear off 2 checkers when you roll non-doubles, then you should nearly always do so. Right? So if you roll a 5 and a 2, and you can take off a 5 and a 2, do it. All right. The counterexamples are rare. I will show you literally the worst case scenario. Here's an example where the greedy play is not correct. Right? It's say you got a 4-2 as White. You would say, I'll take off the 4 and take off the 2. Now that's going to leave you with 13 checkers. So you're in a 7-roll position unless you roll aces twice, right? Well, if you play it correctly and go 4 to 2, and then take the 3 off, now you have 14 checkers. You're in a 7-roll position, and you only miss if you roll 3 deuces. Whereas if you make the greedy play, even though it brings you to 13 checkers, you'll lose out if you roll 2 deuces. With the right play, it's 3. So here's a case where, I think most players would actually get this right over the board. But these are these smokestack type positions involving a 2, a 4, or a 6 are pretty much it. So I go into more details in one of my primetime articles. This was on counting bear-off positions. Okay, that's rule number 1. All right, that only takes a few minutes. Rule number 2 is a beautiful formula that should be better known, called the 2EH formula. The name of the formula is mine. The idea for this formula, I give credit to Robert Urquhart and Phil Simborg. And it's a handy formula because you can use your hands to operate it. Okay, and it's for counting the number of ways to hit your opponent when you are on the bar. So let's look at an example. Okay, so if I ask how many, so white here is on the bar. Okay, and trying to enter against a 2-point board with the 3 and the 6 point. So white enters with 4 numbers. White enters with 1s, 2s, 4s, and 5s. That's 4 numbers. And notice black's blot on the 10 point. White can hit that blot with 2 numbers, with aces and 3s, right? So white has 4 entering numbers, 2 hitting numbers. And so the number of ways to hit black is approximately 2EH. If white can enter from the bar with E open points and can hit black's blots with H direct hitting numbers, then the number of ways that white can hit black is very approximately 2 times E times H. So in this last example, since E is 4 numbers enter, and H is 2 numbers hit, then 2EH would be approximately 16. And indeed, there are exactly 16 ways for white to hit black. Okay. Now, the title of this talk is Understanding Backgammon Formulas. So let's try and get some understanding as to how this magic formula works. As I said, I call it a handy formula since you can do it on your hands. On one hand, let's say on your right hand, you count the entering numbers. And in my head, I'll even say the entering numbers like, 1s, 2s, 4s, and 5s. And on my other hand, I'll say 1s and 3s. So I'm lifting 4 on one hand, 2 on the others. I multiply the hands together. 4 times 2 is 8, and then double that to get 16. Now, caveat, the formula assumes that none of black's blots are in black's inner board. So we're only talking about hitting black when black is, these are like outfield shots. If white has direct shots at black from the bar, then I'm just going to say count them in the usual way. First, count how many ways you can hit that inner board checker, and then add the other rolls that hit the other checkers. Otherwise, it's too complicated. But anyway, let's do a real example, and I won't even give you a picture. Just in your head, white's on the bar, and black has a 4-point board. So that means that white has 2 entering numbers. Black has blots outside the inner board that can be hit with 3 different numbers. Then white can hit black approximately 2EH ways. That's 2 entering numbers, 3 hitting numbers. Their product is 6. Double that, and you get 12 ways to do it. All right. So why questions? Why does this work? And can we get an exact answer? All right. So here's the exact formula, sort of. Okay, I'll give you an exact formula, sort of. Right. The exact formula is the number of shots is 2EH minus something plus something else. And sometimes the somethings balance each other, or they're close, and that's why 2EH is usually a very good estimate for the number of shots. And I'm going to tell you what the first something is exactly. Okay, so let's first get a handle on why that 2EH is so good. So again, in this position, we have 4 entering numbers, 1s, 2s, 4s, and 5s, and 2 hitting numbers, 1s and 3s. right? So imagine you're white and you have two dice, a red die and a green die, right? And there are 4 ways to enter and 2 ways to hit. Let's first count the number of ways of entering with your green die and hitting with your red die, right? So you have literally 4 numbers that enter. In this picture it says, 1, 2, 4, and 5. That's right. And hitting numbers 1 and 3. So that would be 8 ways to enter with your green die and hit with your red die. On the other hand, there are also 8 ways to enter with your red die and enter with your red die and hit with the green die. When we put these all together, we count. I have 8 O's and 8 X's. That's 16. You'll see there's one place where they overlap. So that gives us 15 ways, but that's really close to 16, right? That's 15 shots. Okay. Let's do another example. Suppose instead of entering with 1, 2, 4, and 5, we enter with 1, 3, 4, and 5, and we still hit with 1, 3. How would that change things? Well, again, you have 8 ways to enter with the green die and hit with the red die, and there are 8 ways to enter with the red die and hit with the green die. But now when we put them all together, you'll notice there are 4 places where we overlap. All right, so saying 8 plus 8 is 16 is a much bigger overestimate because of those 4 places where we overlap with the rolls 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 1, and 3, 3. Okay, so that gives us 12 ways to hit in this situation. So I promised you more of the formula. The exact formula looks something like this. It's 2EH minus D squared plus something else. Where that D is how many duplicated numbers. Those were numbers that both entered and hit, right? So in our last example, I'll go back. In our last example, there were 2 duplicated numbers, namely 1s and 3s were numbers that entered and they hit. That's why when I count on my fingers and say 1, 3, 4, 5, I hear it in my head, 1, 3, 4, 5, and I hit with 1 and 3. I can hear the duplication of those 2 numbers, 1 and 3, right? And so, for example, suppose you entered with 1, 2, 3, 4, and you hit with 3, 5, right? And what do we have? Your entering numbers, you have 4 entering numbers, you have 2 hitting numbers, and how many duplicated numbers? Just 1, namely the 3s are duplicated, right? So our formula, the number of shots is guaranteed at least 2EH minus D squared. So you have the 16 minus the 1 squared gives us 15 shots at least. All right. Here's another example. Suppose you're coming in on a 1-point board, right? So you enter with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You hit with 4 and 5. Are you a favorite to hit? Well, let's see. We have 5 entering numbers, 2 hitting numbers, and 2 duplicated numbers, right? 4s and 5s. So take a second, take 3 seconds, and tell me how many shots do you have? At least, guaranteed, at least 2EH minus D squared. You've got 5 on, exactly. You've got 5 on your right hand, 2 on your left hand. You multiply those hands together, that's 10. You heard that 4s and 5s, multiply that by 2, double it is 20. Subtract the 2 squared, and that's 16. All right, so there are at least 16 shots. I can't say whether you're a favorite or not, maybe because there's that one little extra piece that you can add. That's something else, are the things that weren't counted by entering with the red die and hitting with the green die, or entering with the green die and hitting with the red die. Marty Storer calls these shots from Siberia. These are like your uncounted doubles. You know, what if you rolled doubles and that weren't duplicated in your original formula? Or stray hits, checkers from the bar. This is typically like a 7 or an 8 shot from the bar that wasn't counted earlier. I'm not going to go into all those details because I've got more formulas to cover, but if we do go back to our original example, then we saw the 2EH minus D squared with 4 entering numbers, 2 hitting numbers, 1 duplicated number is 15. But there was a shot from Siberia in the form of double fives, right? That wasn't counted in the 4 entering numbers and the 2 hitting numbers. So if you come in with double fives, you can hit that checker also. And that brings us to 16 shots, exactly as promised. All right. If you want more of the details, you have to see the summer 2019 issue of Primetime Magazine, right, called Shots from the Bar and the 2EH Formula. Okay, so that's it for the number 2. Onwards. How about 3? Okay. So let's start with the question of, if you have 3 checkers on the bar, you're closed out. Poor thing. You're closed out with 3 checkers on the bar. How gammonish is it, and how backgammonish is it? Right? How likely are you to get gammoned? How likely are you to get backgammoned here? And here's the answer. So here's just to be clear, this is the kind of picture we're looking at. Okay, so you've got a board that can win if you hit a shot. So and black has the perfect distribution. If you're ever in doubt how you want to distribute your 3 spare checkers, the safest and greediest way combined is to put those spares on the 4, 5, and 6 point. So assuming this worst case scenario, then how often do you lose a gammon here? It's turns out to be about 77%. And you lose it, but you don't lose a backgammon very often. It probably feels like more, but you only lose about backgammons about 5% of the time. By the way, if black does not have the ideal position, and you just shift those checkers over a little bit, to the right, as the checkers get more and more buried, the gammon chance goes down, and essentially they go down by about 1% for every pip that you move them over. This was something John O'Hagan told me, and it's very good. Okay, so that's that. But now, while we're on the subject, how many backgammons with 3, 4, and 5 on the bar? I said with 3 on the bar, you only get backgammoned 5% of the time. But with 4 on the bar, your backgammons are very real. They're 20% of the time. And with 5 on the bar, it doubles even again. It's 40% of the time. All right, so that's when backgammons become very, very significant. Some people worry about hitting too many checkers because of the possibility of a delayed shot, from, oh my gosh, I got hit while I was trying to clear my 2 point, Well, it does happen. If you don't care about backgammons, then maybe you want to just stick to, hitting 2 checkers instead of 3, 4, or 5. But you can see that. So yeah, with 5 on the bar, white can actually win the game 4% of the time. But if backgammons have any value to you, then you just go ahead and hit away. Just go and be greedy. But while we're at it, how many gammons with 3? So we did backgammons, but the real question you're interested is how likely are you to get gammoned with 3 on the bar? And let's say you have P outside pips. That is, not only do you have 3 on the bar, you still have some stuff in the outfield that has to get home. All right. How do you? And let's say the total amount of to travel is P. Then that says then very, very approximately it's 78 plus P %. And the formulas I'm going to give you are not as accurate as most of the formulas that I like. I'm going to say these are accurate to within 5%. I'm still doing some research so these are not yet in a primetime backgammon article. I'll try and improve on these a little bit over time. But anyway, so these are accurate to within about 5%. But this is not one of those things that you need to know with extreme precision. You just want to have a gut feeling. In particular, if you're if you have like 10 outside pips and 3 on the bar, well, it's almost, you're very, very likely to get gammoned. And I bound these formulas by 95%. You can't, a formula can't go over, obviously not over 100%. Nor can it really go over 95% because, as we've seen before, white has some actual winning chances from the bar. And if you win, you don't get gammoned. More usefully than 3 checkers on the bar, more often we have 2 checkers on the bar. And I love this formula. I use it probably in every match. unfortunately, when I have 2 checkers on closed out on the bar, is how, or not so much that I have 2 checkers closed out on the bar. I'm worried about getting 2 checkers closed out on the bar, and worried about how likely I am to get gammoned if that happens. Okay, that I worry about in every match. And the great formula is it's 40 plus 2p. That is, take a number of outside pips and double that, and add it to 40, and that's your approximate probability for getting gammoned. If you have all your checkers on the inside and p is 0, I think the probability is close to 38%. But in terms of this large range of values, going all the way up to 80% when p is 20, you have this formula works really well. Once you that in other words, each pip costs you about 2%. That's a useful idea in itself, that each pip costs you about 2%. When you're thinking about staying back, for instance, or running out, you can see how much what it's costing you in terms of the gammon. Once you get beyond 20 pips on the outside, then it's like 6. Then each pip costs you about 1%. Diminishing return sets in, so it's about 60 plus p. So once you get above 80, just add 1 for the outside pips. Okay, so let's do an example. All right, here you are, and you're closed out with 2 on the bar. You have 11 outside pips, right? The checker on the 10 point has 4 pips to go, and the checker on the midpoint has 7 pips to go. So this is a position with 11 outside pips. I would estimate that to be roughly 40 plus 2p, about 62%. XG says I'm pretty close, within the 5% that I promised you. So you get gammoned about 2/3 of the time. Again, there are of course exceptions. Like if you have a whole bunch of checkers on your 7, 8, and 9 point, you have to add more than those pips because of the crossovers. If you have checkers on your 13 point and your 7 point are somewhat even 2 checkers on your 13 point seems to add a little extra to that, just because how inefficiently 6s play, and how you're likely to sort of waste more coming in than you normally would. Anyway, that's more details to come in a future article. What about with 1 checker on the bar, right? Closed out on the bar. Now here, I'd say the 3 key numbers, without trying to come up with some exact mathematical formula that you're not going to remember. Let's just say the following 3 key benchmarks, right? With 14 pips or less, with 14 pips, you get gammoned about 20% of the time. So very, very roughly, as you go from 0 checkers to 14 checkers, each pip costs you about 1.5%. Okay, and then the break-even point, 50-50, whether you get gammoned or not, is about 24 pips. All right, so you can think of that as saying once you get past, as you go from 14 to 24, each pip is saving you about 3%, or costing you 3% as you grow from 14 pips to 24 pips. Those 10 extra pips are costing you about 3%. And then as you go with 40 pips, then that's 80%. You have 40 pips on the outside. You're an 80% favorite to get gammoned. And what that's saying is roughly there's about a 2% growth rate as you go from 24 pips to 40 pips. Each pip is costing about 2%. And then beyond it, just like we saw earlier, once you get past 80%, each pip is only costing you about 1%. Okay, so good benchmarks to keep in mind in terms of measuring how gammonish your position is. Okay. Any before I get to rule of 4, any questions? Let's just take a verbal break. You can even say the question out loud if you'd like. I can see the chat, but I'm mostly looking at my other screen. Any questions?
Did that 77% number include the 5% for backgammons?
Yes, that's I understand your question now. Yes, with when I said you get gammon 77% of the time with 3 checkers on the bar, that's correct. And so strictly speaking, you get gammon 72% of the time and get backgammon 5% of the time. But your chance of losing a gammon or worse is 77. Yeah, good. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay. All right. Well, now move on to 4. Okay, you see, we're only about halfway through. All right. So the rule of 4. I mean, this is one that I think first appeared maybe in one of Bill Roberti's books, right? On advanced backgammon, now called modern backgammon. So let's say white has closed out black. Black has taken X checkers off, and the rest of black's checkers are on lower points, let's say including the ace point. Then the question is, when should white redouble? And the rule of 4 says that white should redouble after bearing off X minus 4 checkers. Prior to that, it's no double. After that, it's a pass. It's a very precise rule. So for example, here we are. Black has 6 checkers off, right? Has 8 checkers left, 1 on the bar. That's 9 checkers, 6 checkers taken off. And so the rule of 4 says the critical doubling point is at 6 minus 4 equals 2 checkers off. That's what we have here. And the rule of 4 says double and take, right? So, and XG concurs. Now is the time to double, right? It's a 0.067 error if you don't. And you definitely have to take. Big mistake to pass here. All right. How accurate is this rule? Well, let's say instead black had 7 checkers off. Right. Now white can't double. It would be a 0.111 blunder to double. Right. You have to, with 7 checkers off. The rule of 4 says wait till you have 3 checkers off, and that's the time to double. You only have 2, so don't double. You know, even if you're tempted with that blot on the 4 point, don't double. You're not ready. And conversely, if we go the other direction, I put one of black's checkers from the bear-off tray onto the ace point. Now black has 5 checkers off, and white has the critical doubling point is 1 checker off. White has waited too long. White has 2 checkers off, and now it is a whoops. Did I? Oh, I'm so sorry about that. That is a pass. Okay, at least I got the equity table right. So it is it's a double and a big pass. Big pass. So this is a very precise rule. Let's see. Without putting it in writing, I'll say if you might say, well, what if black's ace point isn't covered? If it has 1 checker on it, go ahead and still use the rule of 4. As you see, the decisions aren't very close about doubling, about taking, about doubling, non-doubling, taking, and passing. The decisions aren't close. So 1 checker on the ace point, it should still be right. If you have if black has an empty ace point, that's much more serious. That's likely to cost a roll, and I would impose a 1 pip penalty for an empty, a 1 checker penalty for an empty ace point, right? So if black had 5 checkers off with an empty ace point, then I would treat that as like having 4 checkers off. Okay. Let's move on now to, so this is still the rule of 4. Let's see. Okay. As a corollary, you have what might be called the rule of 5, right? And the rule of 5 says, hey, if once you as black have taken 5 checkers off and the rest of your checkers are on lower points, then before white starts bearing off, black has a take, right? Black has a take. The exception to prove the rule is it's a very, very slim pass, less than 0.01, when white has the best 3 spares on the 6, 5, and 4 points. So if white has the ideal set of spares, hasn't taken off any checkers yet, it's the slimmest of passes. But anything other than the perfect distribution, and and black has a proper take if you have 5 checkers off. Okay? Any questions before we move on to 6? Huh?
Actually, real quick, how is match equity taken into consideration with this rule of 5?
Yeah, these are I'm gonna say that when you have the with 5 checkers off, I think you're right around gosh, I'm just going to say the rules are. I don't want to say anything that's not right. So I'm just say the rules are very robust, and I think they apply to a wide range of scores. Obviously, they won't apply to very lopsided scores, but I think most of your scores lie in the 20 to 25 point take range. I mean, most take points are in the 20 to 25% range. I think that these rules would work for those. You start getting into 19, 18, 17, 16% take points, or in some redouble cases, 30, 33% take points, then it's a different story. I'll have to look at that more carefully before commenting on that publicly. Okay. All right, rule of 6. And I decided in the end close enough to come up with a rule of 60. All right, the 60% rule. In a long, so what are your chances of winning the race when the race is really close? Okay, in a long race, say by more than 60 pips, and I mean 60 is actually a relevant number here as well, where both players have the exact same pip count, then the player on roll has about a 60% cubeless chance of winning the race. Okay, so rule of 60 is with an even pip count, you're about 60%. I could get more technical and say when you're 75 to 100, it's like 59%, and when you're over 100, it's 58%. Okay, but I'm going to stay within 2% of accurate just by saying 60%, because as you get closer to 60 pips, now it can go to like 61% or more. When you're leading by P pips, and P, a small number of pips, P is less than or equal to 5, then the player on roll wins about 60 plus 2P% of the time. In other words, when the race is pretty close, each pip is worth about 2%. Okay, so in the 60 to 70% range, each pip is worth about 2%. On the other hand, if you're trailing, you're on roll, you're down a pip, you're winning this race because the average roll in backgammon is 8. So having the roll is worth about 4 pips. The player on roll wins about 60 minus 2.5% of the time. And the corollary to that is if you're trailing by 4 pips, the race is dead even. And that's true at practically every score, whether we're talking about like a 30 pip smooth race to a 120 pip long race. As long as we're talking about a position where we're counting pips and not counting rolls, then trailing by 4 pips, because the average roll in backgammon is 8.17, 8 1/6, that being on roll gives you about 4 pips. So that naturally, then, if you're 4 pips behind, you win 50% of the time, and as you climb from 50% to 60%, you're growing 2.5% as you go from trailing by 4 to even pip count. Okay. All right. Rule 7, one of the best formulas in mathematical backgammon, is Walter Trice's 7n plus 1 formula. This is for calculating the effective pip count in a non-contact position. The EPC, the effective pip count, is the average number of, let's fix that, pips needed to bear off that position. Okay, that's the average number of pips needed to bear off position. By the way, if you wanted the average number of rolls to bear off that position, it is exactly equal to the EPC divided by 8 1/6, the average, let's call it 8, the average roll in backgammon. Okay, so if you really were interested in the average number of rolls, that's your average number of pips divided by 8. And the reason is it's sort of doing multiplication instead of division. If you knew the average number of rolls that you needed, and you know every roll has an average of 8 pips, then multiply that by 8, 6, and that's the average number of pips that you need. This is always, the EPC is always greater than the actual pip count. In fact, I don't think there are any positions where it's anything less than 4, and practically always 5 or more than the actual pip count. All right, so it's your pip count plus the expected number of wasted pips. Imagine every time you bring a checker beyond the 0 point, that's a wasted pip. Trice's formula says 7n plus 1 is the effective pip count. Let's look at an example here. In fact, this was an example from one of my matches yesterday. So I'm white on roll, and I have I'm trying to assess. I've got 8 checkers. My opponent has 7 checkers, right? So one way of measuring who's ahead in this game, I mean, I'm on roll, but I look at this and say, all right, I've got 8 checkers. If they were all stacked on the ace point, that would be, Walter would say, that's a 4-roll position. If everything was on the ace point, here, let me say if everything was on the ace and deuce point, okay? That means your double aces are working for you, your double deuces are working for you. All your doubles are taking 4 checkers off, all of them. That's not happening here. My double aces don't take off 4. My double deuces don't take off 4. My Don doubles take off 2, but my doubles aren't working to their maximum efficiency. So if everything were on the ace or the ace and deuce, that would be an EPC of 7 times 4 plus 1, which is 29. Here, because of the failure of double aces and double deuces for this roll and maybe the next roll, that brings it closer to 30. Okay, so my EPC here is 29.9. By the way, when both players have all their checkers in their inner board, you've probably noticed that that XG will tell you exactly the EPC. Here's the 29.9. There's the 35.1. Black's position, you would not apply Walter's formula in that you would say that you have a this is a position that count where it's more about the pips the black rolls than how many rolls it's going to take, right? What that amounts to is if you wanted a quick estimate of the EPC, you might say, well, there's black has 27 pips, and I know without a doubt there's at least 5 pips of wastage, and that's being super conservative. I know it's going to be at least 1 pip more than that because of the empty 6 point. The distribution's a little wonky. To get like 6 pips of wastage, you need to have like almost nothing on your ace and deuce point. Anyway, so between the empty 6 point and the spare on the deuce and the sort of wonky distribution, that's an EPC of 35. But I could have just said, looking at it, that it was wasting at least 6, which would be 33. 27 plus 6 is 33. One of Walter's wonderful formulas is if you have a rolls position, white has a 4-roll position, and black has a pips position, then the point of last take for black is n minus 3. If white has an n roll position, then the difference in the expected pip count has to be for the point of last take has to be n minus 3. So with white having 30 pips, I know that black's point of last take in a normal score would be 31. All right, I see the 27 pips, and with wastage of at least 6, I know at a normal score this is going to be a pass. All right. In fact, by looking at this 35 position, the fact that EPC is 35 is saying this is much more like a 5-roll position for black than a 4-roll position, even though black has 7 checkers. And you might say, I could be off in 4 rolls. I can even waste once, but it's more like a 5-roll position than a 4-roll position. So once again, N is in the 7N plus 1 formula is the number of rolls that the rollish player needs. And if the rollish player has 8 checkers left, then N is 4. If white had 9 checkers left, then N would be 5. If it had 10 checkers left, N would still be 5, right? Because we would need 5 non-doubles to take off that, 5 normal rolls to take off that position. Okay, I write a whole book about EPC, and someday maybe I'll write an article for the magazine. Okay, so yeah, so there it is. Just saying what we said before. With 7 or 8 checkers on the ace point, this is a 4-roll position, so N equals 4. White's EPC would be 29. Oh, by the way, I mentioned the N minus 3 is your point of last take. That is, if I have an EPC of 29, your point of last take is an EPC of 30. If I have an EPC of 30, your point of last take would be 31. The doubling point is 2 below that point of last take, and the redoubling point is 1 below that point of last take. But at first, calculate the point of last take, because if it's a pass, you know what to do. Let's see. So I think this is what we said before. Here's one nice little thing. White's position is a nearly no miss position, but not all doubles remove 4 checkers. So white's EPC is a little higher. As I said, it was 29.9 or 30. If you want to get a great estimate for how much to add to your 7N plus 1, I didn't write this one down, but I'll just say it. If you have an even number of checkers, which means white's not allowed to miss. If white misses once with 8 checkers, that costs a roll, right? So with an even number of checkers, and everything is scrunched on the 1, 2, 3, and 4 point, okay? Then a great estimate is calculate the average, what I'll call the center of gravity of your position. That would be your pip count divided by the number of checkers. So if you have a pip count of 15, divide that by 8 checkers, and that's a little under 2. Okay, the amount that you add to the 7N plus 1, if you have a center of gravity of G, is 4G minus 7. Okay, so if you had and that's especially if G is 2 or bigger. If G is between 1.5 and 2, it's a little less than that. Below 1.5, there's no adjustment. But again, that's a topic for an article. Here, with having a little bit less than 2 as a center of gravity, 4G minus 7 is 1, which is what's telling us that we're adding a little less than, 4G minus 7 would say add 0.75 to the EPC to get 29.75. And here it is, 29.9. Pretty close, very, very close, usually within half a pip. Okay, enough said about EPC. Last rule that I've planned for you, and then I can just take questions, is rule number 8, not one that's as well known. I call it wait until 8. Here's the situation. You have 1 checker back. You're staying back hoping to get a shot. Black's bearing off, and you're trying to get a shot. You're hanging back. You're moving your checkers inside into your inner board, and then there comes a point where you've moved almost all of your outside checkers into your home board, and you have to decide: do I wait for a shot, or do I run and get off the gammon? Now, assuming you have a board that's strong enough to win, because if it's super crunched, then you don't have no chance of winning anyway. But assuming you have a reasonably strong board, then you can wait until your opponent has 8 checkers remaining. So, for example, let's say you're in this position, you're in white, and you have a 6-2 to play. Okay, now you can play 7-1, 6-4, right? And hang back for one more roll. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe black will roll a 6-3 or a 5-3. You'll hit the shot. That's about 4% of the time, right? That's another handy formula. Black has 4 bad rolls that between their rolling it and you're hitting it is about 4%. 4 out of 36 times about 1 in 3 is about 4%. And it's saying, yeah, the gammon chances are you've got a pretty good chance of not getting gammoned if you hang back one roll. So black has 9 checkers remaining. So if you want to get poetic, you could say 9 is fine, right? And it's a close call. XG double plus says you should stay back. You can stay back. If you run, it's not much of an error, right? But and you're very unlikely to get gammoned if you run, right? 0.6% of the time. Yeah, let's look at that. 0.6. If you run, you're almost guaranteed to be off the gammon. If you stay back, there's a 7.5% chance of being off the gammon. Ooh, let's see how those that fits with the numbers that I mentioned before. I said that if you hang back, you have about a 4% chance of getting a shot, right? So and that's what the numbers say. It says you win about 3.5% of the time. So you have about a 4% chance, but your gammon chances go up 7%. From 0.6% to 7.5%. You're risking about 7 more gammons for about 4 more wins, right? And those numbers there are cubeless. You'll actually win more than that 3.5% of the time because you have the cube. Anyway, so you have about 4% that you're risking that you potential gain, about 7 for the loss. So that's why it's a borderline call to stay back. So I interrupted my poetry. Shame on me. 9 is fine, but wait until 8. All right. But so as soon as black has 8 checkers here, now it's time to go. Right. Now, of course, if you're in a situation like a coup classique where, you're going to get gammoned if you stay or go, and they've got like 3 checkers on the deuce point or on the ace point, you're staying because you're going to get gammoned anyway. But this is more the normal situation where when there was a moment in time to decide, should I stay or should I go? Once they're down to 8, you should no longer wait. Wait. You can wait until 8. That's your curfew. But at 8, with 8, you have to go. All right. Phew. So this was a summary of what I've covered today. Right. And gosh, I was right. I did 60 slides, and it really did take almost the whole hour. If you're interested in more of these formulas, here were some of the things that I would have talked about if I had 2 hours, right? With the 20 backgammon formulas, here were some of the formulas for the rule of 9, 10. There's an 11-12 rule, a 14, 15, the 16, 17. The Liesel rule is from The Sound of Music. I am 16 going on 17 is a nice little rule there. And there's more rules for 17, 18, 19, 20. If you really want to hear more of these rules, I'm happy to say that I'm going to be giving another talk at the Sunny Florida ABT Online Tournament. That'll be on Sunday, October 11th, on the last day of the tournament. I'll be giving a talk like I am today. And my thinking is that especially for those of you that got to hear formulas 1 through 8, maybe we'll get 9 through 16 or beyond when you come to the Sunny Florida tournament run by the inestimable Karen Davis. Of course, if you want to really get all the dirty dirt and details on this, you should all be premium members of the USBGF and get the USBGF Primetime Magazine, right? The current issue has an article. I have a regular column called Math Overboard because, as you can tell, I like to get a little overboard with my math, but I also try to give you math that you can do over the board. The current issue is on what's the take point, for a given score, with very little mental math required. What is the appropriate take point? So I think I'll stop here and say thank you all very much.
Hey, thank you so much, Art. This is wonderful. We love your tips. You have a lot of knowledge to impart the backgammon community. We really appreciate it. Hopefully, everyone learned something new, or at least learned a refinement on their current knowledge. Art, did you want to stay in the channel and keep?
Yeah, I'll hang out. I'll
Okay.
hang out for another 20 minutes or so. If people want to just ask away, and be prepared for me to say I don't know frequently, because it's a beautiful game here. I'm still learning it, and I'm still exploring it, and that's what I love about the game. It's so deep. But ask away. I'll give you my best.
Great.
Guess.
I just want to give players a reminder that play starts at noon Central Time. That's in about an hour. So just make sure to be back in the tournament room channel, which we will give announcements right at noon. But otherwise, feel free to hang out with Art and take advantage of that. So again, I really appreciate you guys coming. The session will be recorded, and you will be able to have another shot at listening to this in Art's on-demand channel. So thanks, everybody.
Nice job, Art. I just wish my brain didn't hurt now.
I know. Well, that's the thing. It's like a math class. After an hour, everybody needs a break. And good. I hope you learned some new things. Any questions?
I actually had one more regarding that formula. That if you can go back to it, I can't remember the one that the P is. You said within 5%.
Oh, that's getting off the Backgammon, yeah.
65.5.
What was that again?
It was. I think your
This was it.
Go down one more slide. I think. Yeah, your result was 62%, and the actual was 65.5.
Yeah.
There it is. I think you go back there. This one. So I think you have P times 2 in the formula.
This is for 2. Yeah. Well, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah, and you said you're still adjusting and trying to figure out because it's not as accurate as you would like. Just based on some things I've seen in the past and seeing how far off you are, would going with P equals 2.2, times 2.2 be better?
In this case,
or does it throw it off other places?
As I said, I am still
tweaking.
Yeah, I think that for me, the 40 plus 2p is, first of all, I of course rather use whole numbers than fractional numbers. Sure. But if the number is like 2.3 or something, you can't just say it's 2 if it's yeah, I'm still trying to refine this formula. I mean, there are things that are affected like wastage that comes from checkers on the 7 or 8 point, wastage that comes from like 2 checkers on the midpoint. So and of course you can get it wouldn't surprise me at all if we change this position, instead of the checkers on the 10 and the 13, what if we put those checkers on the 11 and 12, right? So I wouldn't be at all surprised if that was closer to the 62%, that would bring it down.
I got a question on this one.
That would be one less crossover.
What's the practical application for this formula?
That's a great question. The practical application is in terms of deciding how aggressive you should be as black there are 2 places. Or one is, and from Black's point of view, how aggressive should Black be in bearing off, right? How many chances should Black take for going for the gammon? And I'll go out on a limb here and say the following. With one checker on the bar, okay, let's take the most common situation. With one checker on the bar, if you're in that 20 to 80% range, that's a giant range of winning a gammon, then you should take small risks. You say, I could play completely safe and leave 0 shots, or I can take off an extra checker, but if I roll double sixes or double fives next turn, I'm going to, and then he hits me, that's going to cost me, I might lose. Take little risks like that if you're in that 20 to 80% range. The closer you are to 50, the more risky you're willing to be. Outside of that 20 to 80% range, their chances of winning a gammon are either so slight or so huge that you shouldn't take extra risks to win the gammon. So that's one of the practical applications is, you might call this the 14 to 40 rule. Okay. That is between pips of 14 to 40. That's when you should take small risks to win the gammon. The other place that it's practical is before you've gotten yourself closed out, right? Before you took that risk that ultimately led to a gammon, you might have questioned whether or not to take the risk based on how gammonish that position would be. So if you have one checker that could get closed out and you have 24 pips to bring home, then you'd say, okay, if I make this risky play, if I get closed out, I'm 50% to lose a gammon. So I think I use this gammon estimate formula mostly in that regard by just having a quick look at how likely it is that I'll get gammoned if things go really bad. So yeah, I use it almost every match. At some point, I take a peek at it.
So this is really good in determining what you're going to take in blitz situations.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, and if you're, if you've got 3 on the 8 point and 5 on the 13 point, what's that? About 40 pips right there, right? 6 pips plus 35 and a whole lot of inefficient wastage, plus the checkers you have to take off a checker that's probably not even on the ace point. You're over 40 pips. That means if you get closed out with that one checker, you are a giant favorite to lose a gammon, right? Over 80%. So yeah, that just sort of says it right there. Other questions? I've left my audience speechless. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi, Art. This is Rich Sweetman. Do you have any? This isn't part of what you covered today.
Absolutely.
So I understand if you say I don't want to answer. But do you have any comments about like the Keith count versus the effective pip count, just in terms of a tool to evaluating races?
So the short answer is Keith count, Trice count, eyesight count are all pretty close and reasonably accurate, not as accurate as you'd want them to be. If you, and I had a student working for me this summer, so I did a lot of research on basically comparing racing formulas, and this will be something I'll write about probably a year from now. And the punchline is that if you use Keith count or eyesight count, or some of the Trice rules, like an adjusted pip count, then they're all pretty close. If you could calculate EPC very accurately, that does better, right? If you know the EPC and you use the formulas for, but EPC is harder to calculate than Keith count or adjusted pip count. But if you do know it, it tends to be more accurate. And if you somehow actually knew your probability of winning in a cubeless probability of winning, that's like the whole story. Like if you made your doubling rule to your take pass rule was 23%, take when you're over 23%, drop when you're under 23%, you'd be getting it right like 90% of the time in the close situations. So we looked at bear off positions where the take pass decision was about 0.08, within 0.08 of 1. That is between 0.92 and 1.08. Because outside that interval, a monkey gets it right. There's no just doing raw pip count's going to get it right without any kind of adjustments. But if you are if it's a close call, then the Keith count and eyesight count get it right about 60% of the time. EPC gets it right about 70% of the time, and probability gets it right 95% of the time, something like that. So I don't know if that's a rough answer to your question. there are some elements of the Keith count that are great. For example, the adding, I always add 2 pips for a third checker on the ace point, and I'll add 2 pips for a fourth checker on the ace point. I might add 3 pips for a fifth checker on the ace point. So each extra checker on your ace point is treated as if it was on the 3 point. And each extra checker beyond the second checker, for the third, fourth, fifth checker on the deuce point, I add 1 penalty pip for that. That's as if they were on the 3 point. Starting with the fourth checker on the 3 point, you get a penalty pip for that. That's a less appreciated rule. I'll add a gap on the 4. The Keith count does not penalize for checker difference, and I think it should. That is, the research we were doing this summer seemed to suggest that you should add, and if you're in most positions, having 1 extra checker to bear off should be penalized 1 pip for that. So if you're a regular Keith count user, try bringing checkers into account, and you'll get slightly better results.
That's great. Thanks, Art. I look forward to the art count coming soon.
And someday, yes.
Thank you. That's great.
You're welcome. Anything else? I'll mention one a formula that's not on my list, but remember when I said that that when the race is super close, even pip count is 60%, and each additional the pip is worth about 2%. Don't get carried away with that 2% beyond once you get past 70%. Now diminishing returns sets in, and it's worth more like about 1.5%. So here's a great rule of thumb. At the point of last take, by whatever method you're using, I'll use Walter's 10% plus 2 formula or x minus 5 over 7 formula. when you're at the point of last take, the trailer's winning chance is like 22%. And that's true at a giant range of scores from about 60 pips beyond 100 pips. The point of last take is like 22%. When you're in like 47 to 60, it's like 23%. When you're 20 to 47, it's like 24%. But but the key idea is each pip beyond the point of last take costs the trailer about 1.5%. If you want more accuracy, 1.4% as you for the next 5 pips beyond the point of last take. So if you were 5 beyond the point of last take, 22 minus 7 is 15%. And if you're before the point of last take, it's about 1.6%. So if you're 5 short of the point of last take, you're probably not even doubling there. 22 plus 8 is 30%. All right, and that's a pretty darn good range. So on average, that's 1.5% as your win probability goes from like 70% to about 85%. And then once you're beyond 5 away, one of the formula I would have ended on here, maybe I'll end on this note right now, is this rule of 20 that says, and I use this one a lot too, for if you're 5 to 10 pips beyond the point of last take, then the rule of 20 says subtract that number from 5, and gosh, that within 1% or 2. I mean, I'm not talking no stinking 5%. This is like within 1 or 2%. You subtract that number from 20. So if you're 7 beyond the point of last take, your raw racing chances are 13%, and you can take that to the bank. If you're you're within 1 or 2%. And where that is useful, occasionally it's the lopsided score double or redouble, but more often it's like, oh, I've got some combination of racing equity and shot equity. This gives you a great way to quantify your racing equity, and then you can focus on how much shot equity do I need to get my 22 or 24%, and so rule of 20 is super convenient. All right, but to hear all those details, they'll have to wait till I write them up in the magazine, or you come to Karen's tournament in October. You'll hear some more. Okay, thanks, guys. I'll stick around for one-on-one questions, but I know you have matches to play. So do I. I'll see you later.
All right, thanks, Art. We'll release you all back to get prepped for the noon start time. Reminder, added Valhalla tonight, so watch for those and send payment if you're interested.